The wind in the Siberian Taiga doesn't just blow. It screams with a physical weight that can crush the lungs of anyone brave or foolish enough to stand against it. And for 90-year-old Agafya Lykov, living in the deepest isolation of the Saal Mountains, the winter of 1988 was just another season of hardship but a literal descent into a frozen purgatory, where the mercury plummeted to a bone-shattering minus 75 degrees Celsius. Imagine a cold so intense that the very moisture in your breath turns into ice crystals before it even leaves your lips. A silence so heavy, it feels like the world has died. And yet, in the middle of this white void, a tiny stone doma, primitive hut, built by hand, decades ago stood as the only barrier between a frail woman and certain death. Agafya was the last of the old believers, a family that had fled into the wilderness in 1936 to escape religious persecution, living for 40 years without any contact with modern civilization. But now, with her family gone and the woodpile shrinking, she found herself facing a predator, more patient than the cold. As the blizzard buried her stone hut under 10 feet of snow, Agafya heard the low, guttural vibration of a wolf pack circling the perimeter. Their paws light on the crust of the ice, their hunger amplified by the same desperate temperatures that were currently freezing the sap inside the trees until they exploded like gunshots. She sat in the dark, clutching a rusted iron poker, her only companions a few shivering sheep huddled in the corner of the hut, their wool matted with frost, while the smell of wood smoke and livestock acted as a dinner bell for the starving predators outside. The stone dome, which had been her sanctuary for a lifetime, suddenly felt like a tomb because the heavy timber door was beginning to creak. Under the weight of the snow and the persistent scratching of claws that knew exactly what was hiding inside, she knew that if the wolves broke through the roof or if the fire died, she would be nothing more than a memory lost to the permafrost. But she also knew that her sheep, her only source of warmth and future, survival wouldn't survive the night if she did. Find a way to outsmart the pack. Desperate enough to ignore the sting of the smoke, began digging at the base of the stone walls, its frantic scraping echoing through the small room like a countdown to a massacre. Agafya realized that the stone dome was no longer a fortress but a trap, and if she stayed, she would be cornered with no way out. A place her father had once reinforced as an emergency cache. Would have to navigate a whiteout so thick she wouldn't be able to see her own hands. With the wolves howling just feet away and the wind whipping the snow into a blinding shroud, the 90-year-old widow wrapped herself in heavy pelts, grabbed the lead sheep, and stepped out into the killing cold, unaware that the journey through the woods would turn into a game of cat and mouse that would test the very limits of human endurance. The moment Agafya stepped outside, the cold hit her like a physical blow, a literal wall of ice that threatened to stop her heart instantly. Yet she pressed on, dragging the sheep through snow that reached her waist, while the wolves vanished into the gray haze, only to reappear as glowing eyes on the edge of her vision. Every step felt like walking through wet concrete, her lungs burning with every gasp of the sub-zero air, and the sheep, panicked by the scent of the predators, struggled against her grip, nearly knocking the elderly woman into the drifts, where she would have been buried alive in seconds. She moved by memory alone, feeling for the familiar tilt of the land and the specific scent of the ancient cedars, all while the wolves grew bolder, nipping at the heels of the trailing sheep and forcing Agafya to swing her heavy staff with a strength born of pure adrenaline. It was a scene from a nightmare, a 90-year-old woman, nearly a century old, fighting off a pack of Siberian wolves in a landscape that had long since surpassed the temperature of dry ice. Driven by a spiritual conviction that God would not let her perish in the maw of a beast, just as her legs began to fail and the frost started to turn her skin a waxy, translucent white, a sign of deep frost, the massive silhouette of the hollowed cedar tree appeared through the swirling snow like a dark lighthouse in a sea of white. This wasn't just a tree, it was a giant of the taiga. Its center rotted out over centuries, but its outer shell as hard as iron. And as Agafya pushed the sheep into the cramped, dark interior air, she could hear the wolves' claws clicking on the frozen bark right behind her. She collapsed into the hollow, her body shaking so violently she could barely strike the flint to start a small, controlled fire in the center of the floor. A fire that had to be small enough not to burn their shelter down but hot enough to keep the blood flowing in her extremities. The wolves circled the tree, their breath huffing in the air like steam engines. But the narrow opening of the hollow tree gave Agafya the tactical advantage. allowing her to poke at them with burning embers whenever they tried to squeeze their snouts inside. Hours passed in a blur of shivering and prayer, the sheep huddling against her for warmth as the temperature outside continued to drop even further, reaching levels that would have killed a younger person in minutes. In the cramped darkness of the tree, Agafya became a part of the forest itself, her own heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm of the storm, as she fought the overwhelming urge to fall asleep that she knew would be her last. She thought of her father, Lykov, and how he had taught her that the taiga provides for those who respect it. But even his teachings couldn't have prepared her for the sheer persistence of the alpha wolf, who had now settled directly in front of the tree's opening, waiting for the fire to go out. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity, a battle of wills between an ancient woman and an ancient predator. But as the first light of dawn began to bleed through the cracks in the wood, Agafya realized the storm wasn't ending, it was intensifying, and a new sound was echoing through the valley that made even the wolves tilt their heads in confusion. The sound wasn't the wind or the wolves. It was the low, rhythmic thumping of a helicopter, a sound that Agafya had only heard a few times in her life, and one she usually associated with the outsiders who occasionally brought her supplies. But in this weather, a rescue seemed impossible. It was a team of Russian geologists and rangers who had been monitoring the extreme weather patterns, and feared that the legendary hermit of the taiga had finally been claimed by the elements. Yet they couldn't land in the thick forest, and could only hover, searching for any sign of life amidst the frozen wasteland. Agafya knew she had to signal them, but she was trapped in the tree by the wolves and the cold. So she did the only thing she could. She took the last of her dry tinder and a piece of her own clothing, soaked it in the meager fat from her food stores, and created a plume of black smoke that rose through the hollow top of the tree like a chimney. The wolves, spooked by the sudden roar of the engines and the thickening smoke, finally retreated into the deep brush, realizing that their prey was no longer alone in the woods. When the rangers finally reached her on snowshoes, breaking through the crust of the ice to find the hollow tree, they expected to find a frozen corpse. But instead, they found Agafya Lykov, sitting calmly among her sheep, her face blackened by soot, but her eyes bright with an unbreakable spirit. She refused to leave her land, refusing to be rescued to a city she didn't understand, choosing instead to return to her stone dome once the storm broke, proving that the human will to survive is more powerful than any natural force. Her story remains one of the most incredible accounts of survival in human history, a testament to a woman who lived by her own rules in a world that had forgotten her, surviving temperatures that should have been lethal through a combination of ancient knowledge and sheer stubbornness. Agafya still lives in the taiga to this day, the last of her kind, a living ghost of a vanished era, who reminds us all that even in the coldest, darkest moments, a single spark of life can refuse to go out. If you found Agafya's incredible journey through the Siberian ice as inspiring as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another deep dive into the most extreme survival stories in history. This story is a powerful reminder of what the human spirit can endure when pushed to the absolute edge. But I want to know what you think. Could you have survived a single night in that hollow tree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories about the Lykov family and their 40 years of isolation, click the video on your screen right now to keep learning about the secrets of the taiga. Would you like me to write a script for a different historical survival story? Perhaps one set in the sea or a desert?